around the world. We're streaming live on 3news.com. Download the TuneIn app from the Google Play or Apple iOS store and listen to us on the go. Coming up this afternoon, questions asked over 85% subscription of government's domestic debt exchange program despite over 30 billion cedis in exemptions from the controversial program. We get some understanding plans, answers to what government says is a new settlement date for the new bonds. Also, rating agency Fitch has downgraded Ghana's economy to further junk status. We have details for you. And later on, security analyst Adib Sani calls for urgent government intervention to diffuse tension in Boku over a planned enskinment of a rival chief. Meanwhile, there are growing concerns among Boku residents over the influx of Burkinabe refugees fleeing jihadist attacks into the country.
We are living in fear and panic because we share a border with them, and those who have even run to our community, we don't know whether all of them are asylum seekers. Maybe some of them might be the jihadists who have followed them to the community.
We have details of these stories and a lot more if you stay with us for the next 30 minutes. A pleasure that you could be a part of this afternoon's bulletin. I am Eric Mawuena Egbeta. Let's get into the details now, because questions are being asked about government's reported subscription of its domestic debt exchange program. Government has announced an 85% participation in the DDE, despite what were protests and fears that 80% threshold would not be met. Figures put out by the government put eligible bonds to be traded in the debt exchange program at some 91 billion cedis, down from the initial 137 billion cedis reported at the start of the exchange program, of which 77 billion cedis was traded in by domestic bondholders. The Finance Ministry also, in a statement, stressed an extension of settlement dates for the new bonds, and we'll walk you through the details in a statement that's been issued by the Finance Ministry to this, and it's dated the 14th of February 2023, and it reads that the government announces today the result of the domestic debt exchange program, which closed at 4 p.m. on the 10th of February, and the government, the statement goes on to say, is pleased with the result as a substantial majority of the eligible holders have tendered. This result is a significant achievement for the government to implement fully the economic strategies in the post-COVID-19 program for economic growth during this current economic crisis. Now, to provide sufficient time to settle the new bonds in an efficient manner, the government is extending the settlement date to the exchange from the previously announced 14% February 2023 to the 21st of February. And this settlement date extension is, however, only to process the settlement of the new bonds. And it goes on to say that the issue date, interest accrual schedules, and payment schedules for the new bonds will be adjusted to reflect the actual settlement date, as the exchange period has expired. No new tenders will be accepted, and no revocations will be, or withdrawals are permitted as well. And the point 4 is where there's a lot of confusion for individuals. In addition, since the statement goes on to say that since they've received expressions of interest from other stakeholders to participate in a similar exchange, the government is modifying the 6-month clear market provision of the new bonds as set forth in the exchange memorandum to clarify that such clear market provision will not limit the government from issuing domestic public indebtedness in connection with liability management exercises involving exchanges or similar exercises that do not provide the issuance of domestic public indebtedness for cash consideration. Let's get on the phone and try and make meaning of all of the things that we've been bringing to you. Courage Poti is an economist and analyst, senior analyst with GCB Capital. He's joined us on phone with some thoughts and clarity on all of this. Many thanks, Mr. Boti, for speaking to us this afternoon. So let's try and marry the figures as announced by the government. First, 137 domestic bonds, part of the debt exchange program. Now the state says 91 billion cedis with 85% participation. Not quite clear.
Well, yes. Good afternoon to you and your listeners. And the agitations and if you like, seeming mistrust are all justified in a way. I see from here several adjustments that is yielding. So depending on what you want to call the base for this computation, if you're picking 237 billion, you could be seeing some 60.5% success rate. If you are looking at 130 billion, which is the second adjustment, you will be seeing about 55% success rate, which is actually very much in line with what the broad market expectation was at the onset, that there may not be so much participation. But then I think the government has taken its position. We can agree or disagree with them. And I think the many evidences of the past are the reasons why there will be mistrust. What they are practically saying is that there are some debts that are not marketable, and there are, at some point, contractor bills that needed to be paid with cash, but somehow government decided to give them bonds. And those things happened a lot between 2021 and 2022, where there were so much deposits in the existing bonds. And most of these were off-market transactions, really. Now, if I'm a contractor and you owe me, say, $1 billion or $2 billion, and instead of giving me cash, you decide to give me bonds, will you now bring those bonds under an exchange and then give me haircuts on them, giving your computation for how much you give me, consider the coupon you pay on those bonds and all of that? So I thought it was only fair that those categories of bondholders are excluded. But the question then becomes, at what point did the government realize the need to exclude them? Was it after the Second Amendment? And why was it unilateral? And so it fosters the notion that you are doing some machination with the numbers to get a certain favorable rate. But this just reinforces what I've said all this while, that I do not think the 80% target was set by the IMF. I do not think we need to hit it to go to the board level for approval. That's because if the IMF were looking at the debt level of 132 billion and decided to impose a success rate of 80% for a deal, then if you look at it within those parameters, we are way short of it. And so I think we needed to get some interest savings on the local market, make significant progress with it, and then we can approach the external investors. And to the extent that, however you are looking at it, whatever denominator you are using, we have achieved some interest savings. And from what they are announcing now, assuming it cuts across the market and without adjusting for the payments in kinds and, of course, the individual bondholders and all of that who may have different rates, by using just a flat rate of 5%, we may be achieving between 10 and 11 billion of interest savings. That is quite significant. And that is no free money you would have gotten from anywhere without doing this. So nonetheless, it's still a success. I think it's the communication around it and the adjustments that were not founded along the way that may have contributed to the kind of conversation we are having now.
So for you, there won't be concerns of credibility in relation to these numbers that we're seeing from government now, because yes, you do admit that it is a success rate in one extent or one breadth, but there are those who make the argument that there's been some massaging or machinations, as you've also rightly stated.
Well, yes, so that is where the credibility issues come in. And people are right to put their own interpretation to the numbers. And again, because of the evidence over time as to how government keeps changing its position, it lends itself to some of this, if you like, mistrust about the whole process. Because I keep asking myself, if indeed we have to exclude contractors, which makes sense to me, why was it not included in the amendment? At what point did we realize that they have to be excluded? At what point did they become an afterthought all of a sudden, something as critical as that? And to the point where even as at February 7, when the offer was to have closed, and then we decided to give a 3-day administrative window to complete the processes, we were still working with the memorandum that stated 130 billion as the eligible bonds being targeted.
Right.
At no point were we told that the figure could come a little lower than that. But we are seeing from 130 billion, 97 billion now as a target, and then there was 82 billion tendered, which would have amounted to 84.91% success. I mean, the optics doesn't look great.
Right.
Even if government is attempting to explain it. And whether it's a legitimate explanation or not, I think the way they went about it leaves a lot of room for speculation, and rightly so.
Just finally on an extension of the settlement date, and if you look at the statement, the point 4 appears to be shrouded in a lot of confusion. If you could provide some clarity for minds that are not financially adept to understanding some of these very complex terms as stated. I'll try to read it verbatim, but you joined us when I was reading that point 4 in particular, where they say they've received expressions of interest from other stakeholders to participate in a similar exchange. Is it the government stating that they've outdone themselves and there's a lot of interest now from other bondholders seeking new bonds from the government?
Again, quite confusing, but I think in plain terms what they are trying to say that other investor categories who may not be included in this are requesting that their bonds be exchanged for the new one. Given the opposition we've received and then all of the challenges that bedevil this whole exchange program, it's a bit surprising to hear that, but practically that is what they are saying, that some investor groups are expressing interest to now exchange. And from what they are saying, people who were eligible and haven't exchanged, the window is closed, so they are not accepting any more offers. But they are trying to sound the note that they could come to market, contrary to what they said that they will be absent for 6 months. They could come to market and do such transactions, not for cash, but to swap old bonds for new bonds for those investors that may be willing to do so, or some other form of liability management that will not necessarily result in government getting new cash from bond issuances really on the market. I think that is the point they are making. Which categories of investors are making the demand?
That's not quite clear.
I'm not too sure what category of investors they are, but really that is what they are trying to say.
Right, then. Mr. Boti, I appreciate that you could speak to us and provide this much clarity.
My pleasure.
That's Courage Boti. He's an economist and an analyst a senior analyst with GCB Capital, speaking to us this afternoon on the latest from government's domestic debt exchange program. Let us know what you think, whether or not this is the final we'll be hearing of the DDE, and if it brings finality to all of the conversations going forward. But you're listening to the news here on 3FM 92.7. We're streaming live on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube, and so you can leave a message there for us, and we'll do the reading of the mini subjects we're bringing to you this afternoon. But let's do some more stories now, this time on the security front, because security analyst Adib Sani has called for urgent government intervention to diffuse tension in Boku over a planned enskinment of a chief for the area. The security analyst says the overlord of Mamprugu traditional area, the Nairi, plans to install Alhaji Saidu Abagri, a retired educationist, as the Boku Naba, warning there is a high possibility of protest or violence if the plan enskinment goes ahead. He says that government must act decisively to diffuse tension between the two feuding factions. And Adib Sani, he'll join us pretty shortly on Zoom with some more on this. But there's been a lot of talk in relation to the development in Boko and the influx of foreigners there, with the fears of jihadist attacks and the likes. My colleague Ibrahim Abubakar paid a working visit to the area and recceed the border towns up north and has a documentary pending. Here excerpt.
As violence flares in neighboring Burkina Faso, thousands of refugees trickle into Ghana. Both the young and old have been forced to flee their homes unprepared to seek protection here. So all the people you see behind me, are Burkinabe nationals who have run to Ghana to seek asylum because of disturbances in their various communities. Here at the border town with Naba, over 1,700 of them have come in within 5 days. Well, other border towns have also recorded similar figures. For most of these asylum seekers, they would have wished to return to their various communities, but as to whether those places are safe for them to return is a question they keep asking themselves. Though government is yet to provide any aid to the asylum seekers, chiefs and residents of Sogo and Wednaba, border towns in the Boku West district, have given them shelter.
They are our neighbors. As the Bible says, that we should bear one another burden. So immediately the chief informed me that they have arrived. There were no place for them to stay. I asked them to come and have their shelter inside the church.
But the biggest challenge is feeding the refugees.
Since they came, it's about 9 days now. It's not been easy feeding them. We can imagine the number of children that have come to the community. Feeding them from morning, evening, it's not easy. And the community member will have to at least contribute food stuff and clothing and other things to support those who have come, the foreigners. So it's not been easy. He has cried to government, but he has still not received any support from government.
There's no place for them, so they stay with the community members. They eat with them, and this is also a big challenge in the community if the government can assist. Because this year we have a lot of people lost their harvest due to this elephant ride, and they are living under extreme economic hardship right now. And this is the case that Burkinabe too also came in addition.
There are, however, concerns of insecurity by some residents of the host communities.
We are living in fear and panic because we share border with them, and those who have even run to our community, we don't know whether all of them are asylum seekers. Maybe some of them might be the jihadists who have followed them to the community. So we actually live in fear and panic. But we are hoping that things will normalize so that as they go back, at least we can have full security within our community.
These jihadists, I learned that the Burkina armies went to the forest and then some fled. We don't know. They can come with this group and mix with the people, so we can't know. So if the government can rise and then assist us, it will help. It's not easy with us here. For
now, the attacks have seen the asylum seekers warmly welcomed in various Boku West border towns. Ibrahim Abubakar.
So that's my colleague Ibrahim Abubakar with that report, situational report on Boko and the influx of Burkinabes as jihadist attacks continue to grow there. Meanwhile, security analyst and team lead at Kojinta Ghana, Reverend Father Clement Apengo, has cautioned that the continuous infiltration of Burkinabe refugees into northern Ghana may put the country at risk of xenophobia. Speaking at a masterclass workshop on conflict transformation organized by the Catholic Relief Services in Netherlands, Father Clement called on the security service to collaborate to deal with the situation.
Our little resources at the district level are going to be stretched. We have to take care of these refugees who are coming in because they are our fellow human beings. And when you look at some of the women and the children, you can't look at them and just say, go back. So our resources are going to be taxed. Number two, we run the risk of xenophobia. Okay, these people are coming in, then all the relief agencies are arriving, they're giving them blankets, giving them food, and the local people are like, we don't even get these things. So it can create some animosity between the local people and the refugees. And thirdly, you can have a situation where you have some of the violent extremists filtering through these refugees. They come as refugees, and before you realize, they can react. So for me, these are the three areas that I look at. And for me, for us Ghanaians, this should be a lesson to us.
That's Reverend Father Clement Apengu, who is a team lead at Kojinta Ghana and a security analyst. Let's return. We'll try working connections and speak to security analyst Adib Sani, but let's return down here and 3FM News has gathered that 15 out of the 18 individuals arrested yesterday over the clashes at the Commonwealth Hall of the University of Ghana have been released. The Old Vandals Association is also making frantic efforts to secure bail for the remaining 3. A new residential policy arrangements by the university directs continuing students to occupy other accommodation facilities provided by the school, with plans to make Commonwealth a mixed hall. And Accra High Court placed an injunction on the residential policy decision by the university after some aggrieved students of the Commonwealth Hall on Friday, January 6, 2023, filed a lawsuit. Let's get some more from Bernard Odro-Techi, who is the 2008 JCR president of the Commonwealth Hall, and I believe one of the leading voices in all of this. So, do we know if all the students have been released now?
Not yet. Currently, processes are underway to get them bailed out. But I'm sure by close of the day, they will be bailed out.
So, process is underway. There's been the narrative that the students have been lawless. Is this something you agree with? Because yesterday the clashes, some argue, was totally avoidable.
If there is anybody who should be described as lawless, that would be the university management. Because there is a management whereby court has given 2 different injunctions. First, an interim injunction, second, interlocutory injunction. Both injunctions, they have failed to comply. So if there is anybody here that we should describe as very, contemptuous, failing to respect court orders, that should come from them. What did the students seek to do? Very simple. Court gives order night February. 14 February, they go to the court to get their keys to their rooms. Then the SWAT team of Ghana Police Service just pounce on them. And in my candid view, in the 21st century, we don't want to see investment being run this way. What was even the business of the Ghana Police Service University of Ghana, come out to be specific? It is simply that court has given an order, and the order was clear, explicitly clear, that the status quo must remain. So continuing student talk of 2nd, 3rd, 4th year should be reinstated. So what crime did these students commit just to go to the hall to get their keys to get to their room? And who firstly invited the police to the University of Ghana? Question should begin to ask to the university, who invited them? What was their business to be there? If there is any enforcement for the Ghana Police Service to have done, it should have been enforcing that the court order should be respected. But be that as it may, they went there to brutalize the students. Were they lawless? Were they armed? Hell no. Take time and watch the video circulating on social media, and you realize that these students were harmless, they were not armed, they didn't pose any threat to the university security. So to the extent that the whole SWAT team, and don't forget that we have the normal form police unit and the SWAT team. The SWAT team are called when they issued beyond control.
The form police unit.
I mean, what were they seeking to achieve?
Let's just end the conversation. So you're seeking to have your students, all of them, bailed today. What are your next steps? You secured a court order. Right. The university says they received it late last night. Okay. What are your next steps?
So if the university has asserted that they've received it late and they've received it today, so the court order must be complied with. Compliance simply means that allow 4th, 3rd, 2nd year students to be reinstated. Secondly, the issue is taking full trial in court. And once it is in court, I wouldn't like to go into the merit or otherwise of the case. So respectfully, we must allow the court to bring the matter to final determination. But prior to going to, before we get to that level, the court order does say the status quo must remain, ought to be respected. Right. And when we do that, this chaos, anarchy, confusion will not even happen at all.
Right, then that's Bernard Odro-Techi. He's 2008 JCR president of the Commonwealth Hall, joining us in studio for a conversation. Let's return to our story on the situation in Boko. Security analyst Adib Sani has joined us via Zoom for a conversation. Many thanks, Mr. Sani, for speaking to us this afternoon. So tell us more about this planned enskinment and where you're picking intelligence from.
I also there was a helicopter that was sent in to Tamale to pick up the Nairi to Accra because the president wanted to see him. And from the information I got, the Northeast Regional Minister got to the palace. I understand there were hundreds of people who prevented him from entering, and they hooted at him, but the Nairi asked that they let him in. And I understand he was told, the Nairi was told that the president wanted to meet him, but, you know, it was a no-no for them. And I understand when they were leaving, the people erupted in jubilation. They even didn't want to see the minister there and all that, because it's quite obvious that, minds were made up. This is what they wanted to do, and they achieved it. And I don't think it would have been possible for any security agency to prevent them from doing so, because it was too late then. Because at that time, we had there were, I think, thousands of people had thronged the palace already, and there's nothing that could have been done but for the enskinment to proceed. Now we are here, and tensions are high. The possibility of violence spiraling out of control as a result of this enskinment is very high, because what it means is we are now going to have two parallel authorities in Boku. So even at the point, the Mamprisi chief was a regent. Now they have a substantive chief who is going to rub shoulders with the Kusas chief, who, by the way, has been recognized by government. So we are in a much more complex situation today than it was yesterday. And it's only going to make it more difficult for us to be able to achieve peace in that area.
How complicit is government in all of this? Because you picked intelligence, there were delegations that were sent there by government. How complicit has the state been in trying to deal with this situation? Because it continues to come up every now and then.
Well, it is difficult to say. But what I do know is, and everybody knows, is that government has made it clear that they recognize the Na Abu Grago as the legitimate Boku Naba. However, the Mamprisis also claim that no, we are the owners of the land there, okay? And I think government is incapacitated. They are not able to do much beyond just coming out to say on TV and on radio that they recognize Abu Grago as the legitimate chief. And I was even talking with a colleague just before I came on air. I said, sometimes we receive intelligence, much more credible intelligence than the politicians. Unfortunately, you give them the information, you don't see action, them using it to, actualizing it on the ground. But the thing is, some of us saw it coming, but we're not too sure about it.
Right.
And I think government also did little to prevent it from coming, because they would have been able to prevent it from happening, not through the use of brute force, but by engaging the parties more. But unfortunately, not much was done, and we are here today. So I think government would have a much more Herculean task ahead than it was yesterday, because now we have two parallel authorities running Boku.
Mr. Sani, we'll have to leave the conversation here. We'll come back to you as and when for a lot more. But that's security analyst Adib Sani speaking to us on the situation in Boku. We'll end with a legal luminary and member of the Council of State, Samuel Kujitu, who is advocating the immediate revision of the minerals mining law to benefit the state. He made the call when he took his turn at the Institute of Economic Affairs Constitutional Review Series.
If the minerals belong to the state, which means that the president is only in trust for us all, why do you allow a foreigner to come and take the gold, take the oil, and then he pays you peanuts, you call it royalty? Should it not be that whatever expenditure the person has made in exploring or exploiting, that should be put as debit, right? When the mineral is dug out, be it gold, be it bauxite, be it manganese, the oil, that then becomes what? Whose property? It should be the property of the state. The person who had worked, of course, needed to be compensated. then why don't we come to some share system whereby a small percentage will go to that person also as dividend for the work he has done, and the rest of the money belongs to us. Do you see that if we are doing that, we will not need to go out and borrow money? It's a suggestion I'm making, is to say that we will need to look at that provision in the Constitution and maybe tighten it in such a way that we do not, because what happens in Ghana is the fact that people are in government, people come from outside, they put something under the table.
That's member of the Council of State, Sam Okujeto, ending this afternoon's edition of the news. Stella Michelle is seated to bring us the very latest in the world of business. Stella, take it away.
Thank you so much, Mawuena. Let's continue with some business news this afternoon. Coming up, investors who sign on to the debt exchange program will not receive payment for the bonds that matured on February 6th. We will tell you why. Also, we'll tell you how government secured the 80% subscription for the debt exchange, and inflation has dropped marginally for the first time in 20 months. We have the details of these stories and many others coming shortly. Stay with us. Let's begin with our first story this afternoon, as if you signed onto the domestic debt exchange, then do not expect any payment on the bonds that matured on February 6th this year. This is because these bonds have been included in the debt exchange. Only those who refuse to sign on are expected to receive payments. These bonds constitute only 10% of the total value of the matured bonds, which means government can easily, government can easily give to them. The 5-year bond matured some 9 days ago, but government failed to pay the principals, hoping to do so after the debt exchange is concluded. With the conclusion of the program, government now has only about 364 million cedis to pay. The full results of the debt exchange shows that about 3.3 billion cedis, representing 90% of these matured bonds, were tendered in the exchange program. Let's still stay with the results of the domestic debt exchange, as government was able to achieve its 80% target only because it reduced the eligible bonds. Originally, government intended to restructure 137 billion cedis, but the full results released by the Ministry of Finance indicates that the value of the eligible bonds was 97 billion and not the original 137 billion. My colleague Sani Abdurrahman is joining me in the studio this afternoon with some analysis. Sani, it's good to have you on the show, but we want to find out, first of all, how did we get to the 97 billion when all along we knew it was 137 billion that government wanted to restructure?
Well, they are quite surprising because, as you've indicated, we knew government was targeting to restructure 137 billion CD worth of eligible bonds. And as of last Friday, when the results started to come out, we were told government has exceeded participation by some 80+ percentage. And that's quite good news for the government. But we had our reservations because we knew government had granted some exemptions to a group of the bondholders, and that certainly means the 137 was not realistic. So we decided to wait till the results were released so that we can have a fair appreciation of what is really happening. And last night when the results came out, we realized the eligible bonds have now moved from 137 to 97.7 billion cedis, and that's quite surprising because we know the only exemption that has been granted so far is to pension funds, right, which is about 27 billion Ghana cedi approximately. And if you do the mathematics, you take out 27 from 137, to be left with 110. So as it stood, we knew the eligible bonds will be around 110. But government is now saying the eligible bonds came down from 110, from 137 originally to 110, and now to 97.7 billion Ghana Ghana cedi. And that's quite surprising because that tells you there is a deficit of 12.3 billion Ghana cedi in terms of the eligible bonds that we all knew. And there was no communication that indicated that government had made some revision as far as this whole program is concerned regarding the eligible bonds. So government may have to come out to explain in its own interest what amounted to the change that we have seen now, because that may raise suspicion and concerns whether, for example, maybe the participation was not up to the level government thought it will achieve. So the denominator may have been changed from 137 or 110 to the 97 that we are being told. And even that government secured 82.9 billion, which is quite below the 97 that was even reduced, and stuff. So certainly a problem that government may have to come out to explain so that some of these doubts and concerns could be allayed.
Few words I picked from you: doubts, concerns, challenges, and surprises. But we know that the finance minister is expected to be in Parliament on Thursday. Hopefully, the parliamentarians will probe further into this result that has been released. But I know that we here on the Three Business Decks will be probing further into it. So we'll be expecting more analysis from you, Sani. I was speaking to my colleague Sani Abdurrahman, who joined me in studio this afternoon with some analysis with regard to the results that was released by the Ministry of Finance. I did mention that the finance minister is expected to be in Parliament on Thursday. Definitely will be probing further into this. Let's do more stories as the Bank of Ghana's governor, Dr. Ernest Addison, may have a lot more questions to answer following revelations about the central bank's role in the financing of government's budget deficit. In a recent statement released by the regulator, Dr. Addison, in justifying the bank's actions, said the decision was made in the light of the country's dire economic circumstances, but many analysts are worried about the governor's seeming cost relationship with the Minister of Finance, arguing that his actions have largely contributed to the current state of affairs. There's more in the following report.
The Bank of Ghana has been accused of printing in excess of 41 billion cedis of new notes in 2022 as part of funding government financing. According to the International Monetary Fund, the central bank printed about $3.3 billion for government against its own rules. According to the Bank of Ghana Act, the bank shall not lend more than 5% of the previous year's tax revenue to government, but that appears to have been flatly flouted by the regulator, who explained it had to do so due to the worsening economic situation facing the country. Now, while some have accused the governor of crime and engaging in illegality, convener of the Individual Bondholders Forum, Senor Hossi, said the governor has been extremely disappointing.
What was difficult about that time that made it practically a blank check?
Mr. Hossi says the BOG governor will have very serious questions to answer.
He has a lot of questions to answer. You can't continue underwriting people's fiscal recklessness. Well, Ken want to borrow much more money. He will want to borrow as much money as it will help him meet his political end. But you, as governor, it's you who pulls the plug. Who lends the most to government? If you know you can't get the money, won't you change your lifestyle? But anytime government wanted, they got it.
Let's look at one of our major headline stories for this afternoon, as inflation has dropped marginally for the first time in 20 months to 53.6% for the January compared to 54.1% in December. This means from January last year to January this year, the general price levels went up by some 53.6%. However, on month-on-month basis, inflation went up by 1.7%, meaning the general price levels are still higher in January compared to December. Let's listen to Professor Samuel Enim, who is the government statistician.
First pointer is in terms of what is driving the marginal dip is more from a non-food perspective rather than a food perspective, because from a food perspective there was a marginal increase of 1.3 percentage points, whereas from a non-food perspective we saw a 2.0 percentage point drop. The second pointer should be the difference between locally produced items and imported items, comparing December 2022 and January 2023. In December 2022, we saw a slightly much bigger variation between imported items and locally produced items. Although what we are seeing in January is still significant, 12.5 percentage point, the 12.5 percentage point difference is marginally lower than the margin that we saw in December 2022. So from another perspective, one might argue that the marginal drop is from the imported perspective. This only partly suggests that the stability that we saw in the exchange rate might have had some impact on the rates that we are recording in January 2023.
And you heard the voice of government statistician there, Professor Simon Enim, earlier today announcing the new inflation rate, which has dropped marginally for the first time in 20 months to 53.6%. In more news, Ghana has suffered another downgrade by Fitch Ratings, cutting the country's long-term local currency rating to restricted default. The international rating agency blames the downgrade further into junk status to government's conclusion of the debt exchange program. The recent default on the bonds that matured on February 6th and another due for payment this week. This recent downgrade was expected as it is linked to the debt exchange program. Ghanaians are likely to witness some drop in the prices of petrol and diesel at the local pumps in the second pricing window, which kicks in tomorrow, February 16. The Institute for Energy Security's IES is projecting that petrol will be sold at around 14 cedis 40 pesos and diesel to sell around 13 cedis 90 pesos in the coming days. We'll be hearing from some analysts with regard to these new predictions from the Institute of Energy Security. But we also know that increased demand for the dollar is affecting the performance of the cedi. Bids for the dollar are as high as 12 cedis 65 pesos, while offers are also high, around 12 cedis 85 pesos. Offshore forex traders are leading with firm bids in the midst of a short supply of the dollar. If supply of the dollar does not improve, the cedi will continue to lose value against the main trading currencies. And that's all the news we have for you this afternoon right here on 3FM 92.7 with me, Della Michelle. When you log on to 3news.com, there's more business news. Before we go, just a quick wrap-up of our major headlines this afternoon. Investors who sign onto the debt exchange program will not receive payment for the bonds that matured on February 6th, and we did tell you why. Once again, my name is Della Michelle. Thank you for your company. Black Rasta is standing by with Urban Blend.